The Idries Shah Foundation podcast. Practical Psychology for Today. Featuring the works of Idries Shah, voiced by David Ault. Welcome to the Idries Shah Foundation podcast. In this edition of the podcast, we will hear more selections from Caravan of Dreams by Idries Shah. This audio has been made available by the Idries Shah Foundation. Who recognized the Master? Sufis frequently point out that the respect given to authority figures is often the product of sentiment, publicity, or malobservation. Hilali, the 16th century teacher of Samarkand, used to illustrate this doctrine by direct demonstration. This series of planned incidents is from Salik's Tib al-Arif, Medicine of the Gnostic. Hilali, accompanied by 5 of his disciples, went on a long journey through Central Asia. From time to time, Hilali made his companions act in various ways. These are some of their adventures. When they reached Balkh, and a deputation of the great people from the city came out to greet the Master, Hilali said to Yusuf Lang, "Be thou the Master." Yusuf was received and honoured. Reports spread of the miracles which he had accomplished merely by staying under the same roof as certain sick people. "This is what people think dervishhood is, and what we know it is not," said Hilali. In Sirkhab, the companions entered the town all dressed the same, none walking in front of another. "Which is the great master?" asked the chief of the town. "I am he," said Hilali. Immediately the people fell back, exclaiming, "We knew it by the light in his eyes." "Take a lesson from this," said Hilali to his companions. When the company entered Kandahar, they were given a feast by the chief Sada, all sitting in a circle. Hilali had given orders that he was to be treated as the least of the disciples, and that Jafar Akhundzada was to be treated as the master. But the chief Sada said, "Verily, this least of the companions shines with the inner light, and whatever you may say of him, I regard him as the magnetic centre of the age." All saluted Hilali, who was forced to recognize that the Sada, although a ruler, had also the capacity to perceive what men do not perceive. Solomon, the Mosquito, and the Wind. This famous tale of Central Asia is often used as a demonstration of the Sufi teaching that justice is only relative, though man claims that it is absolute. On a famous occasion, challenged by an Armenian philosopher to prove that fables were intended for anything more than entertainment or the inculcation of simple morals, the Sufi wanderer Qazi Naim told this tale in the 18th century. He claimed that when one could see the limitations of personal vanity, a different world might become perceptible. This assertion was, however, not accepted by those present, and Naim was actually tried for robbing the people of entertainment, sentenced to be handed to the justice of the mob in Astrakhan. He was stoned to death, saying, "You are doing useful work, for violence may impress truth on life in spite of intentions." The story is also found in Rumi's Mathnavi. One day, a mosquito went to the court of King Solomon the Wise. "O great Solomon, upon thee peace," he cried. "I come to seek redress at your court for the injustices which are daily being performed against me." Solomon said, "State your complaint, and it will certainly be heard." Said the mosquito, "Illustrious and all-just one, my complaint is against the wind. Whenever I go out into the open, the wind comes along and blows me away. I therefore have no hope of reaching the places which I regard as my lawful destination." King Solomon spoke. In accordance with the accepted principles of justice, no complaint can be accepted unless the other party is present to answer the charge. He turned to his courtiers and commanded, "Call the wind to make out his own case." The wind was called up, and presently the breeze which heralded his coming was felt to rustle slowly, then stronger. And the Mosquito shouted, "O great king, I withdraw my complaint, because the air is driving me round and round in circles, and before the wind is actually here I shall have been swept away." Thus were the circumstances imposed by both the plaintiff and the court found to be impossible to the cause of justice. The definition of the word finished is, "This word means finished." Proverb. The Bees and the Hollow Tree. This is a favourite tale of Balkan dervishes. It is attributed to Syed Jafar, died 1598 in Ephesus, who was a successor of Ibrahim Gulshani of Cairo, who founded the Gulshani order, a combination of the four paths of Sufism. He died in 1553. Jafar is popularly believed to have visited the stars as a sort of precursor to today's spacemen, in a luminous chariot without perceptible motive power. The Gulshanis handed back their metaphysical endowment in a brass, silver, and copper casket to the Azamia, or Greater, Brethren in the 17th century, retaining, it is said, only the powers of obtaining interviews with certain historical figures long dead. Syed Jafar, Grand Master of the Four Paths, was asked by an enquirer, "Which of the paths is the best of paths? And why is it that there are so many bodies of earnest people surrounding institutions teaching enlightenment?" He answered, "Once upon a time there was a forest which sprouted from seedlings which grew into trees. These trees lived until their appointed time, giving fruit, shelter, and a livelihood to many creatures. Then, for a good reason, their task completed, the trees died, and the forest became lifeless. Lifeless, that is, except for a number of bees which were looking for a home, and looking for a place to build up corporate life. They found that many of the dead trees were hollow, and in them they built their hives. The trees served well enough for many generations of bees. Then, one by one, in the normal course of decay, the trunks began to fall. Those bees who were still in solid enough trees pointed to their less fortunate fellows, saying, "Look how wicked they are. This is a punishment for them." Others said about them and others, "Let us bring them to our hives, for they are destitute and should be helped. This might have happened to us after all." Yet others said, "How useless were their hives that they collapsed like that. Let us take care that ours do not follow." But in spite of what they said, little by little the trees all fell, and all the bees were rendered homeless at different times. The bees thought about things in an obvious way. Many of them did not realize that the hives were deliberately made just for shelter and providing honey. Many did not realize that they should have taken advantage of the trees and hastened their work before they collapsed. This last difficulty was because bees did not trouble to set aside a part of their time and effort to study the nature of their environment. Nothing cheap without reason. Proverb. The effects and use of music. Many of the dervish teachers have forbidden the use of music, not because they regard it as of no value, but because they regard it as of such fundamental value that to listen to it wrongly provides pleasure and prevents its function in a means to truth. Ibn Durrani. It is, however, difficult for the cultivated man to believe that his perception of music is, in fact, the lowest of the sublime possibilities of music. Hatim el-Askari. Sa'di builds these ideas into a memorable autobiographical fragment in his Manners of Dervishes. Although my revered mentor, Sheikh Abu al-Faraj Shamsuddin, son of Jauzi, the peace of God upon him, used to advise me to abandon my liking for song and take up solitary contemplation, I was young and full of appreciation of it. I followed a path, therefore, at variance with the commands of my master, and enjoyed music and song in the company of dervishes. And whenever on those occasions I remembered the Sheikh's admonition, I used to say, if an abstainer were to taste wine, he would excuse even the intoxicated. One night, however, I came upon a number of people gathered around a singer. His voice was worse than hearing the news of one's father's death. Sometimes the fingers of the audience were in their ears, sometimes on their lips trying to hush him. Nobody was pleased except when they got up to go. I said to my host, "Give me cotton wool, for God's sake, for my ears, or show me the door." But out of regard for the group, I remained where I was. When morning dawned, I took off my turban and placed it, together with the gold piece and my thanks, before the singer. My friends were surprised and amused. One said, "In this action you have not been guided by wisdom. Presenting the turban of a man of culture and a piece of gold to a man who has never been given anything." I answered, "Cease your reproaches, for the remarkable qualities of this man have become visible to me." "Tell me his qualities," said my friend, "so that I may befriend him and earn forgiveness." I told him, "My revered master has repeatedly told me to give up music and song. I have until now ignored his advice. Through the performance of this singer, I have been able to realize the adverse possibilities of music." Haste is from the devil. Proverb. Confessions of John of Antioch. Reputed to have lived in the 13th century, Yahya, John of Antioch, lived, worked and travelled in Syria, Palestine, Egypt and India. He may also have visited Central Asia. Though well known in oral tradition for his sayings, very few written records of his life survive. They have never been collected. Quite early in my youth I noticed, provoked by what I do not know, that the beliefs and the loves and hatreds of people seemed to originate with the teachings of their parents and the community to which they belonged. The Mandaeans, for instance, hated the Christians, although they knew little about them and did not want to increase their knowledge. And the Christians believed preposterous things about the Muslims, in spite of living amongst them and having a daily refutation of their prejudices, which they were unprepared to accept. Again, philosophers debated doctrines, and arrived at answers which were profoundly affected by the quantity and nature of the knowledge with which they started their exercises, and their prejudgments about the world, life, and people. I was for these reasons attracted to the people of the Sufi thought, although, aware that I was myself greatly affected by changes in mood, in speculation which was a mental habit with me, and by hope and fear, I doubted whether I could reach the understanding of humanity which these marvellous people exhibited. At first, because of these shortcomings, I found myself attracted by the assurance which came, as I saw, to many, by the repeated affirmation by teachers of all kinds that their own path, and theirs alone, led to salvation. I saw that it did, indeed, lead to a stilling of the searching and uncertainties of life. Again, because of the same reasons, as I soon realized, I was at one time powerfully moved by the expedient devised by the Hindus, which consisted mainly in removing oneself, by an effort of the will, from the need to dwell upon human problems at all. At length I became a follower of the Sufis, because in my intercourse with them I discovered that they invariably helped to protect me from the consequences of my selfishness, and seemed to help grow in me that part which could assent to the need to regard my fellow man as my brother, and my brother as myself. All religions preserved, it seemed to me, the indications, in the form of aphorisms, of what should be attempted. None of them preserved the means by which a man could make his way from where he received the message up to the point where he practiced the message and became whole. I understood, long after I first started to follow the Sufi people, that entry into the body of the Sufis is possible in truth only after one has passed beyond the entry with the tongue and the entry with the heart alike. The Sufis, by accepting and passing on the capacity of guides in this way between where man finds himself to be and where he wants to be, made themselves knowing mediums fully sensitized, so that a certain high power could move through them. They did this only at the risk of loss of personal repute, for men did not understand them, and by shunning the customary attachments of the world until they could truly resist them, and thereby often forswore the great dignities which they could otherwise have had. And they also took as their watchword the most courageous contract: "We can help you to help yourself, and we must discharge our duty setting aside whether we are understood by the generality of people, and our help to you is at whatever cost to our potential achievements in the superficial world." These are the men who love mankind, and whose love enables people to find the road to their own home. Silent Teaching. The great master Ahmad Yasavi of Khorasan spent 9 years in irregular and strange contact with certain of his disciples. They were Shabaz, Luqman, Jalal, and Janush. During this time he gave them practically no verbal instruction and performed no rituals, studied no books. Instead he had them observe him and practice applied arts, which included carpet weaving and building, and sometimes their own professions. In the city of Balkh he sometimes called them to him to see some object which he had to show them. For other studies he sent them to listen to apparently irrelevant expositions given by others. It was by his inner powers that all these experiences became transformed within the consciousness of these followers. This is the process known as teaching by signs. At times these four cried, "Why cannot we attend the exercise meetings of the Master?" And yet it is they who became masters, the founders of the orders, and reached in the end the high attainment of the aim. May their innermost consciousness be sanctified. Jangju Kanabadi, Isharat-i Khawajagan, Signs of the Masters. Ahmad Yasavi died in 1166. Three things. Three things cannot be retrieved: the arrow once sped from the bow, the word spoken in haste, the missed opportunity. Ali the Lion, Caliph of Islam, son-in-law of Muhammad the Prophet. This podcast is copyright 2016, the Idries Shah Foundation.